President Trump welcomed President Lopez Obrador of Mexico to the White House on Wednesday. The meeting comes as the president continues to downplay the severity of the pandemic and pushes to reopen schools in the fall. Natalie Brand has the latest from the White House.
Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador is meeting with President Trump at the White House as they tout the new U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. The visit comes as the president steps up his push to reopen schools this fall, despite surging coronavirus cases in states across the country.
We're safely reopening our country, and very importantly, we're safely reopening our schools. We want the schools to be open.
The president even tweeted this threat, saying may cut off funding if not open. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo emphasized it's a state and local decision when and where to reopen.
Well, I won't give New York funding. You don't give us any funding now.
The president also tweeted that he disagrees with his own CDC's suggestions for reopening schools, calling them very tough, expensive, and impractical.
It's guidance. It's not requirements.
The vice president said the CDC will issue new guidance next week to give more clarity on reopening schools because of the president's criticism.
What is not the intent of CDC's guidelines is to be used as a rationale to keep schools closed.
The presumptive Democratic presidential nominee, Joe Biden, continued to bash the Trump administration's response to the pandemic.
The guy who says, I'm commander-in-chief, and then doesn't command anything in this fight against the COVID-19.
The president this week has touted a lower death rate from the pandemic, but Dr. Anthony Fauci called that a, quote, false narrative, urging Americans not to become complacent.
And Natalie joins us now from the White House. Natalie, as we saw in your piece, President Trump balked at the guidelines that the CDC released on Wednesday for reopening schools in the fall. What exactly did the president object to in the CDC guidance, and why was he threatening funding when that power actually belongs to Congress?
Right, Lana, a lot of these decisions will be made by state and local leaders on when to reopen schools in their various jurisdictions. And we know the vice president said today during that task force briefing that already 47 states and a couple of territories have in fact submitted or put out reopening plans. So this is a very localized decision, as we've seen with other health-related decisions, planning decisions around the pandemic. And the vice president, when asked about the president's threat, said basically, you know, he wants to emphasize the importance of reopening schools in the fall. The position of the White House and task force officials has been that there have been negative impacts to children who have been out of their schools and out of in-classroom learning. When you think about the social services that are provided at a school or extra help, meals, items like that, that's really what the White House has been stressing. And even Dr. Anthony Fauci, who we've heard take issue with comments that the president has made and called the president's comments about the lower death rate a false narrative. When asked about reopening schools, he also agreed that the U.S. should, as best as possible, try to get children back in classrooms, but also stressed that people need to follow the guidelines based on the level of infection in their communities. Now, the CDC had put out some guidance weeks ago that included recommendations such as the use of facial coverings, changing around the spacing in classrooms to allow for social distancing at 6 feet, putting up barriers. Task force officials today saying that those were just suggestions, and then we learned that there will be a new guidance to be released next week following the president's criticism today. But the task force again making it clear that they want to work with the state and local jurisdictions, and they don't want this guidance to be used as a reason that schools do not reopen in the fall, because we know, again, that this is a priority for them. Lana.
Yeah. Well, Natalie, you also mentioned Dr. Tony Fauci. The president has said that he disagrees with Fauci, adding that the U.S. will be in, quote, good shape in a few weeks. Do others in the administration agree with this? And is the White House concerned that the president is splitting from his health experts in a very public way, which could impact the administration's response to how the pandemic is actually received?
Right, Lana, we see these tweets from the president, and then we hear from the task force officials themselves, most recently at this morning's press briefing of task force officials after their separate meeting. And they do still express concern about the surging number of cases in a number of states in the United States, especially those 4 major hotspot states, Texas, Arizona, Florida, and California, where the new cases account for around half, or those states accounting for around half of the new cases. And the vice president today even mentioned requests from governors requesting medical personnel. And he says they're working to process those requests to deploy doctors and nurses and medical personnel to the front lines in those states. So clearly we are hearing action being taken, or the administration trying to defend their actions being taken in light of these new surges in certain states, and a lot of concern, continued concern by task force officials. But so much of this pandemic has been localized, and also now it has become a political issue when you look at campaign season and the comments by the presumptive Democratic nominee Joe Biden, who has taken aim at the administration's response. This really varies in opinion depending on who you talk to on the ground, whether you're talking to a supporter of the president or a critic. Lana.
Natalie, I also want to ask you about a recent federal lawsuit that was filed by Harvard and MIT, challenging the administration's decision to bar international students from staying in the U.S. if all of their classes are online. What more do we know about this lawsuit, and what is the president's objective in this move?
Yeah, this new rule change came as a surprise to these universities and has received a lot of vocal opposition, particularly by the universities now suing and trying to block the new rule from taking effect. They argue that it does not offer a reasonable basis justifying the policy, and also saying the public was not given notice to comment about this. And the administration has said this week that the international students could remain in the U.S. if they receive some in-person instruction. But again, they're trying to prevent the international students from taking all online courses, or saying if they want to go that route, they can return to their home countries to complete their coursework. And from what we've learned, if they return to their home countries, they would not lose their visa status according to these ICE guidelines. But university officials again have slammed this change. Harvard's president saying it appears that this change purposefully places pressure on universities to open their classrooms for in-person instruction without regard to concern for health and safety. They also say this would be profoundly disruptive and unfair to international students, noting a lot of frantic concern around this decision right now.
Very interesting, especially the finances of many universities being closely tied to those international students. All right, Natalie Brand, thank you.